Hey everybody, this is Jennifer Maggio. Welcome to the Life of a Single Mom video series. We are talking about when forgiving is hard. And I kind of laughed when we were putting these topics together because I thought, when is forgiving not hard? If you are stumbling upon this video today and you are probably thinking, yeah, forgiveness is real hard in this season that I'm in right now as a single mom. We're going to talk a little bit about that today with my guests. Let me introduce them to you. So we have Crystal Thibodeaux with us, and Crystal is the single mama of 3 beautiful daughters, and she is also the programs manager with the Life of a Single Mom. So Crystal, I'm so grateful to have you.
Thank you for having me today.
And I signed Crystal's paycheck, so she might have been hustled into this one, but she has a word for you today, and I know it's going to be such an encouragement to you. And then we have Roland Warren, and Roland, I'm so grateful for your friendship, and you're the CEO of CareNet, former CEO of National Fatherhood Initiative, correct?
Yes.
And then also you wrote a couple of books, but one in particular that's new, and I'd love for you to share that with our audience.
Sure, absolutely. The book is Raising Sons of Promise, a guide for single mothers raising boys. So it's really kind of focused on the journey that my mom and I had from my childhood, and kind of uses Hagar from the Bible and Ishmael and that story as an archetype for a single mom raising a son. So it's a powerful story, very old story, but very contemporary in terms of all the dynamics. And I think there are a lot of lessons from that can be helpful to single moms.
Yeah. Well, I know this topic of forgiveness is certainly one that's going to be helpful for all of us, mom, married mom, single mom. You know, you don't have to be a mom. There's such a journey of forgiveness that the Lord has all of us on. We've all been hurt. We've all been disappointed. There have been things that didn't go quite the way that we planned. So maybe, Roland, we'll start with you to talk a little about maybe your journey of forgiveness with your own mom, because I think there's a facet of that in every single mom and son's life, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you have hopes and expectations of certain things, and you know, when you're a single mom, you have lots of challenges. You're juggling lots of balls at the same time, and invariably there's some that you don't always catch. That kind of a thing, and so there really does need to be a perspective of grace, and certainly when you're a son or a daughter growing in that process, it's very easy for you to develop some bitterness or something related to some of those things. And what I found, just in terms of the forgiveness piece, both around anything, is that we have to remember how much we've been forgiven, temporally and eternally, because the call as a Christian is to forgive because you have been forgiven, right? In the same way. And I think if you walk into this process with that perspective first, mindful of the fact that you have been forgiven, people have forgiven you, and it's a gift that you should give to other people as well. I think it's really important, particularly in the parenting process. And as kids, you have this view about your parents or whatever, and then you become a parent and you realize.
Yeah, it's not as easy as you thought, right?
Funny how parents just get smarter and smarter as time goes on, right? Your parents do at the time, So there's a lot of dynamics there, but I think forgiveness is so key. It's so central to healing and restoration.
I mean, it's forgiveness. It's like central to every relationship. The forgiveness piece is, yes, right, regardless. Yeah. But Crystal, I was just thinking about when I first met you, and really that place that you were in. Your divorce was so fresh. And can you share a little bit with the audience about how long you were married and kind of how you got to that place of single parenthood?
So I was married for 24 years, and my divorce was tragic in a lot of ways. My grandparents were married 60 years. My parents have been married over 50 years. I felt like the biggest failure. So for me, there was not only a component of needing to forgive my ex-husband, but myself as well. This was not the life I planned for my children. And for me, that process really started with asking God to forgive me for having this expectation that life was supposed to be perfect. I have a sign in my kitchen that reminds me every day that it's not about perfection, it's about grace. Grace, not perfection. I really just felt like if I could be good enough, or maybe just figure out a way to be more of a Proverbs 31 woman, that this would not, this idea of forgiveness, well, of course I'll be able to forgive, but it turned out to be a lot more difficult than I realized. I had a pivotal moment. I actually had never been in therapy But after my divorce, it became obvious to me that I had a lot of things to work on. And the first day, I went through a couple therapists that weren't good fits for me, but I found one that was, and I realized the day I walked in her office, she said, "What are you trying to accomplish?" And I said, "Help me forgive. Help me not be bitter. I don't want to be more bitter and more angry than I am now in 5 years." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Let's get to work. Let's get to work." And so we started to kind of tease out, what was I angry about? A lot of it was anger at myself for the perceived failure. And what that really taught me became important for my girls. I noticed recently, just a few weeks ago, my youngest daughter was I could just tell that she was hurting. And the Lord impressed upon me, I needed to ask her forgiveness for life being harder than I wanted it to be. And we had this long conversation. I said, "I want you to know, this is not what I wanted for you. I never wanted you to come from a single parent home. I never wanted life to be more difficult for you than other kids. I never wanted you to have less. I never wanted you to have less of me. I wish that you could have had everything I planned for, and I'm sorry." And she was just broken by that. She said, "I didn't even know I needed you to say that." Mm-hmm. But forgiveness is powerful. Mm-hmm. We don't have to pack around all these things every day. It just drains our energy. It really does, to pack around all of this angst and all of this unforgiveness. And it really is a gift that God gives us.
Well, there's such wisdom in you even entering into a counseling session and saying, "Help me to not be bitter." You know, there's an awareness of that, of saying, "I don't want to be this way in 5 years." And I think if we're not careful when we're in the middle of disappointment and trauma and hurt, that it really becomes all about that moment. And there's not an awareness that there's another season coming. There's not an awareness that this is simply a part of our life and not the only part of our life. And I once heard it put this way. I was going through some training on how to counsel, and one of the things they said that has resonated deeply with me for many years is helping someone is about teaching them that thing, whatever the trauma was, you move it from nothing to everything to something. Because most people, of course, are in the denial phase. It never happened. It wasn't that big of a deal. It didn't impact me at all. To then it becoming everything. It's all they want to talk about. They're consumed with it. But when it becomes simply something, it's a development of your testimony. It's something that's giving you different, new perspective. And so I think that's a healthy place of where you get in the forgiveness process. But, you know, Roland, if you could speak a little bit to, I think that I'm thinking of the moms that are watching right now, and this idea that you needed to forgive your mom. There's going to be that mom out there that says, "Forgive me. There's nothing I need to be forgiven for." And can you speak a little bit to that, especially if maybe the dad's the one that abandoned the family? Like, what is that really, as a young man, what were you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, often it was kind of based on some expectations, you know, or times when I wanted her to be there for certain things and that she wasn't, and that's a hard place to be, you know, because when you're a single mom, you have all these obligations. You know, for me, I played sports, right, and I really, frankly, wanted my mom to come to a lot of my sports events, and she didn't. You know, so in that area, you know, there were some issues there connected to that, and because that was a way that, you know, that was where I saw myself as such a big part of my identity. So, you know, if she didn't come to those kinds of things, then it wasn't just rejecting that sport. It was really, in a sense, sort of rejecting me in a sense, and I already had sort of a season or a period of rejection with my dad not being involved. So it's those kinds of things that can have an impact. But, you know, the forgiveness piece is really, you know, it's really not even for the person who's done wrong, but it's for the person who's been wrong. Because one of the insights that God gave me at my dad's funeral was that, you know, forgiveness and apology are not linked. Often we'll say, well, if that person apologized, then I'll forgive. But if you have that mindset, then there's no way to be able to forgive 7 times, 70 times, or whatever, as Christ talked about. The apology is actually for the person who's done wrong, because a whole person, a repentant person, apologizes. It brings healing to them. But forgiveness is for the person who's been wrong. And it's something actually you can do yourself, even if the other person never apologizes. Because the reality is, if you don't have a spirit of forgiveness in your heart when the apology comes, no apology will do. You'll always discount it. You must want something from me. You know, you're trying to manipulate me. That's if you don't. But if you have the attitude of forgiveness before the apology comes, in a sense, no apology is needed. But also when it does come, you'll be able to accept it and walk through that. So, it's been an area that God has worked with on me. And the last thing I'd say about that is that it really is a sacrifice. I mean, it is when you forgive, it's a living sacrifice, right? Somebody has to bear the burden of whatever that was, and rather than you putting it on the person who did wrong, you're actually accepting it back yourself, like from that perspective. And so it does have a cost. And as I heard one old pastor say, the problem with a living sacrifice, when you put it on the altar, can often crawl off.
Yeah.
So the forgiveness as a process is really important to understand, that you may have to take that sacrifice and put it back on the altar again. It's part of that. It's part of that deal in the human condition, because something else can happen, something else can trigger it, and there it is crawling off the altar again. And you just don't want to walk and live in that.
No, I mean, it is. It's a choice. And I think one of the things that's so difficult is when you're walking out the choice to have to continue to forgive again and again. I'm thinking about you raising daughters, and it's one thing to forgive an ex-spouse that has not measured up to what you had hoped and dreamed for the marriage. But it's another thing to forgive the father of your children for re-wounding over and over again and not being there again and again. And so, Crystal, can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's a place where a lot of moms get stuck, is the forgiving again and again when the disappointments continue to come.
Well, for me, that was certainly something that I needed to face, realizing that it's part of the process too. For my children, my girls were older teens whenever the divorce happened, and so we had graduations and all those big milestones, and it was just me, and that was extremely anger-inducing for me. And one thing that I kind of slowly came to realize is that my children did not need the indignity of having an absent parent and a broken parent, if that makes sense. That I needed to be fully present, that I needed to exude dignity where this was concerned, and to not compound their frustration and their hurt by putting my own frustration and hurt on the table. And the only way I can think to do that is to genuinely forgive, not just sort of glibly say, oh, I forgive, but to get down to the root of what happened. And that was ugly in places. It took some nights crying on the floor. It took some intense study of the Word, and some, quite frankly, some deep conversations with God, where I'm talking to Him as a father, and I'm saying, Father, why is this happening? And one thing I learned in the process, He can take it. He can take anything that I have to say to Him, and He's there to listen. He's there to hear my sobs in the bathtub and anywhere else that I want to give them. And that process for me really started to look more like, what did I want my girls to remember about their childhood? There was already going to be this sort of marred place, but it didn't need to have an enormous scab over it. It could just be what it was. I didn't have to add to it. And that really did prompt me being at least open to putting that sacrifice back on the altar over and over again. But it is a process. It is. And it's almost like a renewed thing every day, where you just wake up and you pray about your own heart, and you ask God to give you the grace that day. Maybe you're not going to be perfect in it, and we know you're not, but you can at least get that much further up the road. And really acknowledge that it's necessary. This forgiveness is necessary. It's a worthy goal, because it's going to bring just great fruit and joy in your own heart, in your own family, and your children.
Yeah, I mean, it's bondage otherwise. It's bondage. And it's a difficult choice, and it is the choice daily to continue to forgive when it rises up unexpectedly, when you thought you had dealt with it, and then it just kind of creeps back up. But I'm so grateful for both of you and your wisdom and your insight. And hey, moms, know that we know it's hard. That having walked out this forgiveness journey, all three of us and so many of you that are watching, we know it's hard, but we know that God's grace is sufficient for today too, and it'll be sufficient for tomorrow. And I'm grateful for that in my own life. And so thank you for being part of the TLSM family. Thank you for joining us today. God bless you. This has been Jennifer Maggio, Roland Warren, and Crystal Thibodeaux. We'll see you soon.